Does your dog think that you are a god? It sounds like a joke, or a little burst of vanity, right up until you actually try to see yourself the way your dog does. From down there, looking up, because from your dog's point of view, you are a being of almost unimaginable power. You make food appear out of nowhere. You open solid barriers that it could never open on its own. You produce light in the darkness with a single touch. You command giant, roaring machines to carry you across the world, and then you vanish completely into a realm it cannot follow. And you return, as if from nowhere, whenever you choose, to a creature that cannot understand a single one of these things. That is not the behavior of an equal, or a friend, or even a parent. That is the behavior of a god. So the real question here is not whether your dog worships you. It is whether the god it happens to live with is anything at all like the gods that we ourselves have always imagined. And the honest answer to that turns out to reveal something strange and quietly beautiful about your dog and about us. Let's be clear and honest right from the start about what we are really asking, because your dog obviously does not have a concept of God. It has no religion, no theology, and no idea whatsoever what the word even means. So in the plainest, most literal sense, no, it is not lying at your feet, thinking of you as its deity. But that was never really the interesting question. The interesting question is about the role that you actually play inside its world. Because if you strip the word away entirely and just look honestly at the part you occupy in your dog's life, the all-powerful provider, the controller of forces it cannot possibly comprehend, the single being that its entire existence depends upon and revolves around, that role is not like a friend's, and it is not quite like a parent's either. It is, in pure function, far closer to what a god would be than to anything else a dog has ever known. So the comparison is genuinely worth taking seriously, even though your dog has no idea at all that it is living inside of it. So, look closely at the miracles you quietly perform every single day without ever once noticing them. Your dog is hungry, and it cannot feed itself. It cannot open a can or hunt down a meal in your kitchen, and you simply make food appear, reliably, out of boxes and containers it could never in its life access. That is provision out of nothing, as far as it can tell. There is a door, a solid, immovable barrier that it is physically incapable of crossing, and it stands before it, completely powerless. And you walk up, and with a single small gesture, the barrier swings open. You part the wall. When night falls and the entire world goes dark, you reach out and touch something, and light comes flooding back into the room. You summon the sun itself. You climb inside a massive metal beast, and instead of devouring you, it obeys you and carries you both across distances your dog could never dream of crossing on its own. Every single one of these is, to your dog, an inexplicable act of raw power over a world it cannot control. We call them the microwave, the door handle, the light switch, the car. Your dog has no such words and no such understanding. It only ever sees the impossible, made ordinary, by you, over and over and over again. And then there is the strangest power of all, the one that may sit at the very heart of why this God comparison feels so unnervingly right. You disappear. Every single day, you walk to that door. You cross the one barrier it can never cross, and you step out into a realm that your dog has no access to and cannot begin to comprehend. The entire vast world that exists beyond the walls of its home. And you are simply gone, dissolved into a place it cannot follow, cannot picture, and cannot reach. And then, against what must feel to it like impossible odds, you come back. You materialize right back out of that unreachable realm, whole and alive, carrying the strange sense of places it will never once see. A being who vanishes into another world and then returns at will is not a housemate, and it is not a companion. It is exactly the kind of figure that human beings have been telling stories about for as long as we have had gods at all. One who moves between worlds. one who comes and goes freely from a place that we ourselves can never enter. And because you are so powerful and so far beyond its understanding, your dog spends a great deal of its life doing something that looks remarkably like reading the will of a god. It watches you constantly, studying you for signs, for omens of what you are about to do. It has learned that when you pick up the leash, a walk is coming, that when you reach for the keys or put on certain shoes, you are about to vanish into the other world once again. It reads these small signals the way ancient people once read the sky or the flight of birds, straining to know the intentions of a power that it cannot question and cannot control. It cannot ask you where you are going or when you will be back or why. It can only watch and interpret and hope. So much of what your dog does all day is simply a quiet attempt to understand the will of the enormous, unknowable being at the very center of its world, and to be ready, whatever that will turn out to be. So the power is undeniably there. In sheer scale, you are, to your dog, a genuinely godlike being. But here is where we have to be honest, and here is where this whole thing quietly takes a turn, because a god has never only been about power. Think about the gods that human beings have actually imagined and feared and worshipped all throughout our long history. So many of them were distant, fearsome, demanding. They required sacrifice and ritual and constant careful appeasement. They had to be feared and obeyed and kept satisfied so that they would not turn all of that terrible power against you. Human worship, so very often, was built on a foundation of fear. And this is the exact point where your dog's relationship with you stops looking anything like religion at all, because your dog is not afraid of you. It does not creep toward you the way a frightened worshiper edges toward a wrathful god, desperately hoping to avoid its punishment. It runs to you. It throws its entire weight against your legs. It falls asleep, utterly and completely defenseless, at the feet of the one being that holds total, absolute power over its whole life. That is not the behavior of a creature worshiping a god that it fears. That is, purely and simply, the behavior of a creature that loves. And that is the beautiful, strange truth hiding at the center of this entire question. Your dog genuinely does live with a god, a being of overwhelming, incomprehensible power who controls its food, its shelter, its safety, and its entire world, who performs impossible miracles and vanishes into unreachable realms at will. Everything about you fits the ancient description of a god almost perfectly. Everything, that is, except for the one single thing we always assumed a god absolutely required: fear. Your dog has somehow ended up living in the constant presence of an all-powerful being, and instead of dreading it, or trying to appease it, or keeping a careful, respectful distance from it, it simply loves it. Completely, and without a single reservation. And it trusts that being with the whole of its life, you are not the distant, fearsome god of the old stories at all. You are something that we barely even have a word for. An utterly omnipotent being that your dog is not for 1 second afraid of. A god that it actually gets to curl up against and fall asleep on. And there is something genuinely worth sitting with in that, because it quietly holds up a strange kind of mirror to us. For most of our own history, we approached our gods through fear. We built our worship on the dread of punishment, on the desperate, anxious need to stay in the good graces of powers that could crush us on a whim. We so often obeyed precisely because we were afraid not to. But then, look at your dog. It is living in the direct presence of a being with total power over its entire existence, and its whole response to that overwhelming power is not fear at all. It is a devotion built purely and entirely out of love and out of trust. It has no concept of appeasing you to avoid your wrath. It just wholeheartedly adores the powerful thing that has only ever chosen to be kind to it. In a genuinely strange way, your dog may have stumbled, completely by accident, into a purer form of worship than we ourselves ever quite managed. One with no fear left in it at all. Just complete trust, and complete love offered up to something far greater than itself. So, does your dog think that you are a god? It has no earthly idea what a god even is, but it lives every single day alongside a being that provides it everything, controls it everything, performs the outright impossible, and moves freely between worlds. By any measure that it could ever possibly understand, you are the single most powerful force in its entire existence, and yet it does not fear you. It loves you, which means your dog has quietly done something that, for all of our temples and all of our prayers, most of humanity never quite managed to do. It came face to face with overwhelming, absolute power, and it chose, freely, to love that power instead of fearing it. You are your dog's god. Not a distant one, and not a fearsome one, but a god that it gets to sleep beside, and greet at the door, and love without a single shred of fear. And perhaps the most humbling part of all of it is simply this: you are almost certainly not worthy of that kind of worship. Almost no one alive could ever really be. But your dog offers it up to you anyway, freely and completely, every single ordinary day, to the flawed and ordinary human being that it has quietly decided is the most powerful and the most trustworthy thing in the entire world. So the next time your dog looks up at you, with that whole heart shining out of its eyes, remember what it is actually looking at. Not a friend, not an owner. Something far larger and stranger than that. And then, gently, try to become a little more worthy of it. Because you will spend your whole life being unable to explain to your dog that you are only human, and it will spend its whole life loving you as though you were something so very much more.